Hello.
Our story begins inside the space station at Rango Vinda, where clone trooper Tup was held against his will. His eyes were rolling back into his head, his mind was numbing, and he himself wasn't even in control over himself anymore. Under his breath were the words repeated over and again. Good soldiers follow orders. Good soldiers follow orders. The two remaining Jedi watched him with confusion. Anakin had never seen any of his troopers act out in such a way before. It was uncanny. Trooper Tup hadn't ever shown signs of mental decay, and according to the clone medic, Kix, there was nothing wrong with him scientifically or medically. Anakin and Tipley walked away and spoke to each other, trying to understand the motivation of clone trooper Tup. On the other hand, Rex, Kix, and Fives gathered around their brother, trying to understand why he would target a Jedi. It had to be for a reason, right? Obviously, aside from the blatant madness that seemed to be controlling their brother, maybe there was a reason for it. After asking around, it was clear that clone trooper Tup hadn't had any experiences with Master Tiplar prior to her execution. With no clear reason or rationale for this, Captain Rex told Anakin that he would like to take a squad of troopers to Kamino to investigate this further. General Skywalker was a bit iffy on the idea initially, but he could handle it. With Appa running in his place, everything would work fine. It wasn't like it was the first time this had happened either. Before Ahsoka left the war and the Jedi, Rex and her would pair up while Anakin got Appa, so this didn't really bother Anakin. In a way, which was probably the biggest reason for him agreeing to this, is it felt like Ahsoka was still around. If Rex was technically doing a side mission alongside the main mission with someone else, it would seem like Ahsoka would show up when he came back. All of this was wishful thinking, but at this point, Anakin was plugging holes in a sinking ship. Skywalker watched Rex, Fives, Kix, and a number of other clones escort Tup inside of a light cruiser to Kamino. They would likely have a better time finding answers as a squad. Anakin in the meantime took his men and joined Tipley as they continued their assault against the separatists. Inside the light cruiser, Rex and the boys hung around the medical bay, while Kix did everything he could to find an answer, but none presented itself. Throughout the trip to Kamino, Kix tested out the willing clones that came with him and Tup to Kamino. There was a theory in Kix's mind, and he ran it by Rex. It was kind of feasible, but the trauma the clones received on Umbara at the likes of Pong Krell could have triggered a reactionary action from Tup on the battlefield. Fives noted that his brother continued rubbing his head, even stopping during the battle before the execution. He was going slow, and they almost got put too far behind the rest of the assault squad. Fives considered the idea that Tup was having a mental breakdown, but there wasn't really anything to prove it aside from the still ongoing repeated sentence about good soldiers following orders. Fives suggested speaking to the head clone scientist Nalase upon their arrival to Kamino. She might have answers that they needed. Kix agreed, but he did warn the squad that came with them. Nalase didn't have the most welcoming demeanor towards clones. Unlike General Shakti, Nalase wasn't kind, and she, like the rest of her species, only saw the clones as property. He expressed that they should be careful when crossing the Kaminoan scientist. Her little regard for clone life could lead her to experiment on Tup, or worse. The other clones made a mental note of this, and they prepared for the docking at their home world. It didn't matter how dreary the planet seemed or how downtrodden every tropical rainstorm felt, it was still home. Clouds or not. Being home was like a breath of fresh air, especially after being out on the campaign or battlefront for months on end. Most of the members of the 501st, or survivors at least, hadn't been home since the Battle of Kamino about 2 years before. Rex and Five stood in the landing bay watching the waves under the facility's crest and crash, before they went back in to regather with the rest of the group that came with Tup. At the medical bay, Tup was placed into a room, while Fives, the closest to him, was put into an adjacent room to look after him. Rex, Kix, and the others waited patiently. But they weren't exactly waiting, they were listening. Thanks to these clones being members of the 501st, they came prepared, specifically Kix. He saw this opportunity as one to fundamentally understand the cloners that created him and his brethren. They listened in, because it was not just Nalase, it was Lama Su and General Shakti. The three of them examined the clone trooper, and they found a way to get Shakti to leave the room. She didn't see anything wrong with the clone, and the Kaminoans were trustworthy, so she went to check on Fives, the clone she inspired shortly before he was assigned to the Rishi outpost. As she left the room, she found 5 or 6 clones who came here with their brothers. She walked up to them and spoke softly to them, telling each of the clones that the Kaminoan scientists were trying their best to take care of their brother. She smiled and expressed that she had the utmost hope that they'd be taken care of. Her smile faded as she bowed lightly and turned to enter Fives' room to check on him. Rex looked at Kix, whose helmet was still on, and he nodded, confirming that Shakti was telling the truth. While the clones were listening to her, Kix was hearing everything going on inside the room, with Tup inside of it as she left. Rex and the others looked to each other and then to Kix as the doors closed behind the Jedi Master. He didn't say a word, only raising one hand and lifting one finger. Lama Su was talking to the chief medical scientist and asking her about the inhibitor chip inside of the defective model's head. Kix hadn't ever heard anything about inhibitor chips before, so he continued listening closely. His eyes closed, processing every word and then remembering every piece of detail he learned about clone biology as he's becoming a medic. Nothing here made sense. The Kaminoans were talking about something that went far beyond the capacity of the clones. It was something larger than all of them. Lama Su asked if the Jedi were aware of this plot, and she shook her head, suggesting that Lord Tyrannus be contacted immediately about these inhibitor chip failures so they could get a more direct order on what they were to do following this. But they kill Tup, cut the inhibitor chip out and send it back to Tyrannus, cover it up in another way. They needed to figure that out. She placed a stem into his neck and knocked him out. She started forward and the two clones who were guarding the door from the outside followed the Kaminoans as they left the room. Kix looked to his brothers and took his helmet off. Based on his facial reaction, they needed to go somewhere else to talk about this, and truthfully, even though he heard what they said about the Jedi, not knowing, he wanted to speak to his brothers alone before addressing Shaak Ti. The men entered a barracks that was empty. A barracks that the clone cadets preparing to enter the front lines would use in their spare time before activation. Kix set his helmet down and looked at his brothers, telling them that they had a serious issue. The Kaminoans had implanted inhibitor chips into their heads, but he didn't know where they were or what they were. There were never instructions on how to handle them. One of the men asked if it had anything to do with scientific methods instead of medical work, and he shook his head. This was meant to remain a secret. Someone named Tyrannus was behind this. No one, especially not the clones, knew who Tyrannus was, so they could never connect this back to Count Dooku. Instead, the menacing name was all the confirmation the clones needed to know that the Kaminoans weren't working with the Jedi or the Republic. Kix said that he wanted to get his hands on one of these chips, but the only way to get that information was by pulling up data on the original host of the clone trooper genome. Rex said that he would get it, suggesting to his brother that he go and speak to Fives to understand what the Jedi General said to him. Rex suggested that they go quietly and do this. Even though General Shaak Ti wasn't involved, they didn't have anything concrete to go off of. They needed to be quick here. Who knows how long Tup had to survive this, and how long before the Kaminoans did something to cover it up from Shaak Ti. The clones fanned out quickly and began getting to work on their own respective missions. Rex and another 3 clones went to the archives with an AZ series surgical droid. The little droid helped the clones scan through the archive data on the clone troopers and even helped them find the inhibitor chips. At the same time, Kix had gone to the birthing pods, where all the clones were being incubated. Kix and another 501st trooper was standing with them. The clone medic was scanning through the different stages for all these incubating clones, and he was able to pinpoint the beginning of the inhibitor chip creation. These chips weren't what he initially thought they were. He believed that they were metallic chips that were inserted into their minds, but no, they were biological. They grew with the clones. These infants were infected with a disease that could forever change their lives, and even at that, the lives of every sentient in the galaxy. Kix continued going further, even going back to Fives and confronting him with this information and telling him that he was going to take one of these chips out of both of his and Tup's minds. This of course being if Fives was willing to sacrifice one of these devices from his own brain. He was willing. So, in the middle of the night, as the Kaminoans were all going to sleep, Rex, Kix, and Fives gathered up with an AZ surgical droid. It got to work removing the first chips from Fives' head, as Kix prepared to do surgery for Tup. Fives was asleep in his room, and Rex followed his medic into Tup's room as the next surgery began. By the time Fives woke up, his brother was dead. Tup became one with the Force with the removal of his inhibitor chip. Kix apologized to Fives, but there was something else. Tup went peacefully. The removal of his inhibitor chip killed him, but it also freed him from his pain. Kix reiterated Tup's final words, which in a way gave Fives some peace. It made him feel better, because it meant that his best friend and his brother found happiness in the last moments of his life. Kix leaned on Tup's table, asking what they should do next. Rex looked to his brothers and said that they needed to understand what these chips could do. Once they did, they can form the right people, whether it was the Jedi, the Republic, or the Senate, and so the clones moved out immediately and got to work. By the time morning came around, the clones had gotten themselves information on the inhibitor chips. They understood that with single orders, these chips would activate, and upon their activation, it would command every single clone in the Grand Army of the Republic to begin doing whatever it was that the specific order requested. Rex and the others were going to confront Lama Su. Kix and Fives were going to inform General Shaak Ti on what they had found. Instead of getting their answers from the Kaminoans, they would activate the inhibitor chips by randomly pulling out an order that wouldn't affect the Kaminoans. It turned out that the order that they activated was Executive Order 66, simply to ease hostilities with the clones and their owners, which it kinda did work. Rex and his group of men came in with their blasters raised, demanding to know who Tyrannus was, and demanding for the answers to the inhibitor chips. Why were they put into their heads, and what orders could they activate? Lama Su simply activated Order 66 and they turned into robots. They went from aggressive personalities to loyal soldiers. Because despite Fives having his inhibitor chip removed, the other clones didn't get rid of theirs. They had conclusive evidence to inform the Jedi. Plus, they had a lot of work they wanted to get done before the morning came around so they could inform the right person. They scanned everything they could for information on the inhibitor chips themselves, but they didn't find the list of orders, they found pretty much everything else, and it was a risk that didn't pay off. Kix, on the other hand, was with Shaak Ti, telling her that Captain Rex and the others were confronting the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Scientist at this moment. If they could get the information out of them, then everything would be complete. Shaak Ti realized that this would be a terrible idea. The information was jarring as it was, but if they were confronting the Kaminoans, then things could get worse, maybe even escalate. She told Kix and Fives to go to the communication room and shut down all communications off-world. She was worried that if the Kaminoans could indeed order clones to do anything, then this could trigger a chain reaction, a domino effect if you will. Being that the last known survivor of the Domino Squad was with her, it made the irony of the domino effect all the more terrifying. She ran through the corridors trying to find the Kaminoans, and get the clones away from them, but it was too late. As Fives and Kix ran through the halls, they could hear blaster fire. Shaak Ti was trying to get to the Prime Minister's office, but it was blocked off. Despite Rex and his gang being informed of the orders, the Kaminoans didn't realize their own chain of events. The clones reacted to Order 66 by dealing with the Jedi on the planet, but they were going to make these things much more intense. Fives was with Kix when the communications were interrupted by the order that had infected every clone within Kamino. Shaak Ti's cries could be heard from the corridor away, and Fives turned to Kix and told him they needed to go. Kix shook his head, telling his brother that they were good soldiers and good soldiers follow orders, before walking to the communication room. Instead of Order 66 remaining an isolated incident, it was like a plague. It crept across the battle lines of the Galactic Republic. Jedi were blindsided, just as the Chancellor was, by the immediate change in the Force. While Order 66 was in effect, the clones on Kamino had completed their job. They killed Shaak Ti, and their following orders made them completely loyal to the Order. However, Rex was still fighting himself somewhere inside, and he was able to get the clones to turn on the Kaminoans. It wasn't immediate, but there was this inner fight, one that got him to inform his brethren that the Kaminoans were trying to enslave them. Shaak Ti's body would be brushed to the side of the corridor as clones ferried past her, and moved to imprison every single Kaminoan inside the facility. Because this order didn't come directly from a military command, the clones didn't need to follow the Kaminoans. Their duty was to kill the Jedi, which had been accomplished on Kamino. The next target was maintaining militaristic control. The Kaminoans, sadly, did not have the ability to control the clone army militaristically. They had inhibitor chip orders that could redefine their troopers to follow Kaminoan leadership, but the activation of Order 66 made the clones harsher, so the creators of the clones would not face their mercy. They would instead be either killed or captured almost immediately. Fives was running around Topoka City, trying to figure his way out of this, but it wasn't exactly coming easily to him. The city was locked down. The scientists, engineers, teachers, and so forth were being ferried into prison cells. He ran down to the communication center, but there was an armed guard, not letting anyone in. Fives eventually would be detained because he did not have his chip in. The clones would imprison him, but he wouldn't ever be hurt. Thanks to the aggressive negotiations, the clones were able to get a list of inhibitor chips out of Lama Su, and they were analyzing everything inside the communications room, preparing to completely militarize the Grand Army of the Republic. The clones themselves, with free will, wouldn't have agreed with Order 66, but these weren't free will clones. They were completely militarized. They were sentient drones ready to kill anything and everything so they could achieve total victory. Order 66 was just a step in their grand plan to win this war. Now that the Jedi power structure was removed, with thousands of Jedi dying on battlefronts and on Coruscant, it was time for another radical change to be enacted. The clone army itself was going to usurp the power of the Galactic Republic and elect itself as the sole leader of the Grand Army, lead it into battle and win this war. Afterwards, they would utilize Order 150 and get rid of all the executive orders. The inhibitor chips didn't allow for much free will, but their determination for victory would be what identified their cause. The main reason the clones were able to go this far in this direction was exclusively because they didn't get the order from the Supreme Chancellor. If Palpatine was the individual who executed the Order, he'd be the one in control of the Grand Army's movements. But because Lamassu executed the Order, an individual without any real militaristic oversight in the Grand Army, they didn't follow him. They followed the commanders and captains of Kamino that reinstated the Order elsewhere. This very quickly translated into the hostile takeover of the Republic. Palpatine was still all-powerful, and he relished in the collapse of the Jedi Order, but he didn't exactly have a counter to try and stop the clones publicly, because he never expected them to usurp his power. This in his mind actually wasn't terrible though. The clones seized control and basically informed the Republic that they would win this war, and when they did, they would re-establish the power to the Senate. There was a standoff or two with the Senate Guard, but realistically speaking, they weren't going to survive a fight with the clone army. It was at that point where they had the choice to join or die. Palpatine, as the master manipulator, decided to let things play out, because truthfully speaking, he didn't have to do anything now. The Separatists could win the war, or the Republic could, it didn't matter. He wasn't the bad guy. He had to rely on Dooku following the plan, but that wasn't the biggest issue in the galaxy for him. The actual issue for Palpatine was the clones removing every senator and representative from Coruscant and rounding them up and sending them to a prison on Eridu. The only reason this could be problematic was because that system was so close to the war itself. With the Jedi seemingly gone, there was no knowing how well protected they would be. The clones promised protection, but their focus was on victory. Palpatine would be fine though. He knew Dooku wouldn't betray him. The Jedi on the other side of this were all struggling. They got completely blindsided by 3 armies at the temple. With half of the council present on Coruscant, they were able to lead a sustainable defense, but their order was dwindling down to the low 400s. The temple had fallen. It literally no longer stood. Their order was currently residing on Tashara, a moon in the Outer Rim territories. It was infected by the Pikes, but they hadn't fully cemented themselves on the planet yet. The reason the Jedi removed themselves from the face of the galaxy and went to Tashara was because of location. It was away from the core. A lot of Jedi that survived Order 66, like Anakin, Plo, Depa, and Fisto, were already in the Outer Rim. It was the best place for them to go to and regroup. Those who survived the massacre on Coruscant were able to get ground transport away from the Ecumenopolis and get out of the planet safely. Dooku quietly realized what had happened, and he prepared adequate counters. He was unaware that his master was being moved to Eridu, but the planet itself was a direct lifeline to the core. He didn't want to end the war for the Separatist movement, and while his intention wasn't to betray his master, it was to make sure the war was a total stalemate until Palpatine could return. Outside of Eridu, the Republic could pour into the Outer Rim through Sullust, which was just north of Eridu, but it was a smarter move strategically to hold Eridu instead of Sullust. Eridu would provide a solid base of operations for the Separatists and holding the Outer Rim territories. Grievous was sent to deal with that, as Dooku made a move for the Separatist government, one that was beginning to get paranoid. If the clones could betray the Republic, then what would happen if the battle droids did the same to them? Luckily for Palpatine, Grievous would be deferred by the clone forces stationed to protect the lifeline to the Republic. This now left Dooku in a weird predicament. Within the span of a week, the clones had usurped galactic power. While they didn't have the manpower to maintain control over the entire Republic, the Republic couldn't exactly do anything. It was in a chokehold. Without the clones, they couldn't fight the Separatists, so they needed to allow whatever this was to transpire, even if they didn't agree with it. The Separatists, now that their political rivals were out of the way, were ready to wipe out the clone army. And the clones, fresh after understanding the treatment the Kaminos were going to give to them, were ready to win this war for their freedom, and for the freedom of the galaxy. Tragically, those who would have sided with the Jedi couldn't even feel an ounce of empathy for them. The inhibitor chips blocked all the clones from feeling any empathy for the Jedi. Out on Tashara, Anakin met with Obi-Wan, the sole council member who survived the conflict inside the temple. The Jedi Order was hurting badly. The eldest member was Tera Sinube, who was able to gather the survivors on this gem of the underworld. Anakin almost left the world to go save Padme, but he was stopped. She was safe. His responsibility was to the Order. The scenario was very similar to Obi-Wan and Anakin's argument before their very first duel with Dooku on Geonosis. They had a duty to do: take care of the survivors and prepare a counter. Padme was safe on Eridu, that's all that mattered. The Clone Wars were slated to end nearly 5 months after the Tup Incident. Instead, they continued far beyond that. Each battlefield got more gritty, every conflict had more depths. The clones were fighting for true victory, and the Separatists were only weeks away from calling in their support fleet and army. Dooku had reserves in case something happened to Palpatine or if the deal was off. Now that Palpatine had been out of the picture for about a year, he was ready to act. Dooku was hopeful that the inhibitor chips would wear off, or that the clones would reach a peaceful treaty, but it didn't happen. Palpatine wasn't in communication with anyone outside of Eridu. and the conflict just dragged on. A neutral systems coalition reformed under Bo-Katan, who was able to get aid from the Republic to deal with Maul, before abandoning the Republic to be her sister's successor. It didn't really work in her favor, but because so many worlds were tired of the conflict, she was the lesser of two evils, and so they sided with Mandalore's restructured neutral systems coalition. The only reason any were willing to join was because Satine never slandered her sister. Being royalty meant that Satine's business was everyone's, even for meetings with diplomats. When Satine was asked about her little sister, she never talked bad about her. Satine's lack of desire to gossip or dig at her sister saved Bo when she tried piecing together the remnant of the neutral systems. With planets and systems fleeing the war, it left the separatists and clones in a constant grudge match. However, something interesting happened. The clones were able to recruit Senate guards, militiamen, and a variety of other fighters who wanted to win this war. The Jedi weren't doing too much, truthfully. They had succeeded in removing the Pikes from Tashar, but outside of that, nothing really else. Now, before the Jedi slander enters the chat, they weren't doing this out of willingness. There were 400 or so members of their order. Out of those 400 members, 350 or so were younger than the age of 14, leaving 70 or so Jedi older than a child to take care of the galaxy. Not to mention most of these adults were instructors or archivists. The rest were the few surviving warriors, and they freed Tashara and helped around local systems. They couldn't really afford to do much else with the Clone Wars raging on outside of this location. The political battleground of the galaxy wasn't political at all. The clones had negotiators on Raxus and even Mandalore with the learning princess of Kalevala, but it wasn't really going anywhere. However, battlefronts were. Dooku learned that Palpatine was on Eridu and ordered Grievous to avoid it, sending him to cut the Republic off at Sullust. However, those orders didn't translate to Admiral Trench, who after the Republic pushed Grievous off of Sullust, attacked Eridu. The worst part is, for Palpatine, he didn't die because of the clones. They were evacuating the base and he was the first transport out, being the Chancellor and everything, and then he was detonated. Several of his allies were killed as a result, and the clones had to buckle down the hatches and wait for reinforcements. Trench did die at Eridu, so it was an important life for an important life, so it was kind of fair in most people's eyes. Luckily for Padme, she and her babies were not on that transport. Even luckier, the clones were very kind to their prisoners, who weren't really imprisoned, they just couldn't leave the facility, so technically imprisoned, but not. As the war continued into its 4th year, the Separatists unveiled its own new superweapon, but the Republic was doing the same. As the war ramped up, its conclusion dawned on the horizon. The Separatists had the war in their grasps, but thanks to some commandos looking to kill Separatist council members and/or Dooku, they found the reserve fleet and army. Naturally, these clones detonated the entire thing, destroying any chance for Dooku to call for more reinforcements. This left the clones with a great opportunity for victory. They had pushed the Separatists back to a holding point, and with so much on the line, the Republic mounted up the largest gathering their military had ever seen and pushed for the Separatist Council. Before the battle began, Dooku, who had been experiencing sickness due to the dark side, was even more sick on the ground in the capital of the city. General Grievous was given command over the entire operation as his master tried to heal before the battle began. The Republic arrived with a single Arquentins-class cruiser. It scouted out the battlefield and sped around miniature asteroid fields and gave coordinates for the rest of the Republic fleet. The single vessel gave the Republic an entire map of the battlefield, allowing them to have a direct approach. Clone commanders and admirals along with non-clone counterparts came in quickly. With acclimators, venators, Arquentins, and some Victory-class Star Destroyers, the stage was set for total war. The Republic came in with 3 major fighting forces. Each of them had since colored their vessels to ensure they stood out amongst the sea of battles. Being that the clones were brothers, it helped them keep competition between themselves high, but also allowed them to confuse Separatist forces early on when they started coloring them like this. A Venator fleet from the north dropped in with 3 vessels. It pushed against the very heavy resistance that came out to greet the Republic. The Separatists, like the Battle of Ryloth, prepared counters consistently. Grievous sat back. He believed that the battle would be a very easy Separatist victory, but he was running a bit arrogantly, especially with his brand new refined flagship. The Republic, despite pushing him back at Sullust, didn't exactly show off any of its new fighting force, so he believed that the largest vessel the Republic had would be a Victory or a Venator. The Republic, despite coming in strong early with a Venator and Victory fighting force, was pushed back by the superior numbers of the Separatist fleet. The Arquentins that was sent in to scout out the battlefield was forced to retreat back and hide in the wreckage of Republic forces. As the battle started to intensify more, a reinforcing deployment of a new Venator type including a variety of other Venators dropped out of hyperspace. They unloaded their heavy firepower into the approaching Separatist ships. that, in the gaze of victory, lost sight of their fleet positioning. Now separatist warships were touching tips and colliding into each other to try and counter the Republic. As CIS vessels closed in on the brand new Republic fleet, their ships started to buckle and break, losing their stabilizers and getting ruptured through their cores. Barrages from Republic warships continued to indent the separatist lines. General Grievous learned this news and became aggravated. However, he needn't send himself into combat yet. He had more reserve forces to do that, and despite the Republic looking strong in the moment, similar to their first legitimate strike, it would be pushed back by the overwhelming numbers of the separatist war machine. Just as Grievous predicted, the Republic war machine would start to lose its grip, and its flagships, including the experimental Venator, would lose control and burst into an array of flames over Raxus Secundus, leaving the Republic to again call for more forces, this time coming from a Praetor 1 battlecruiser and Sector Star destroyer. These additional vessels gave the Republic a chance to counter the approaching separatist warships, with the CIS line breaking down due to miscommunication within their ranks. The Praetor eventually started to lose its support destroyers, and therefore, the Republic called in another one, this time to stop the continuous approach of the separatists. As the Republic started to gain a legitimate foothold on the battlefield, they were surprised by the deployment of 2 Lucrehulks and another model of the Malevolence. This vessel, Malevolence 2, was more turbo-laser oriented. When the first Lucrehulk crumbled, the Praetors got into firing range of General Grievous's flagship. A massive array of broadsided power started to dominate the field of battle. Republic super capital ships tried to remain in competition with such a fierce foe, but even with superior fighting forces, and even General Grievous at the helm, the separatist vessels were no match for the continuously growing Republic fleet. They poured everything into this fight. However, they did not intend on giving the separatist vision of their forces before they truly got into combat. Everything the Republic brought was hidden, so every time the fight looked like it was over, it truly wasn't, and the separatists never recovered after General Grievous was destroyed. On the ground, where a sick Count Dooku, one too weak to even stand, remained, the Republic brought that same energy. With 501st members leading the charge, the Republic bounced in. The separatist capital was cut off from the Republic landing party by 2 bridges and a divided assault. The clones tried to set up a variety of heavy turbo cannons to bombard the hell out of the droid forces. It worked tremendously well. With Republic fighters, including Army, Senate, and clones, they pushed onto the separatist city. The heavy cannons continued to unload fire into the ranks of the droid army. While clones pushed against their tanks, they lost their lives. Similar to the battle in space, the Republic got an early lead before it was stripped away from them. Despite the clones still being influenced by the inhibitor chips, they couldn't attack civilian targets. Their war was with the droid army and with Dooku. They understood that. As their forces pushed in again, with the lead of ATTEs, they expected a quick resolve. The heavy artillery of the Republic far exceeded the strength of the separatist vehicles, but as it turns out, the separatists had a backup plan for the ground. Outside the city limits, a CIS airbase was stationed, and because the droid forces in the city kept getting bombarded, they sent their Hyena bombers into the fray to take out the tanks and clones in the battlefield. While the men of the 501st led the charge, not even they could break past the shield generator established around the main separatist base. What made matters worse is without a proper target for the orbital bombardment, the Republic fleet, which had just won the battle over the planet, could not deliver a bombardment to the surface without endangering the lives of the citizens. The clones and walkers sent in to capture the base initially went in with the belief that they would win, but with MTT tanks and spider droids coming out of the shields with their blasters and lasers firing away, it only proved that the siege of Raxus would be as grueling as the one in space. Inside the palace, Dooku climbed off his bed and crawled into a chair so that he could watch what would not just be the final battle of the war, but the final moments of his life. With turbo tanks covering the loss of ATTEs and heavy artillery pieces, the Republic attempted another push, this time from the western bridge. With the fight falling flat, the clone stationed some heavy mortars on the outskirts of the city. The separatists were trying to make a push for the Republic landing zone, but they couldn't make it. As Dooku watched the Republic lose its first 2 assaults, he watched in the distance as a wing of LAATs prepare for their attack. It was upon seeing their landing that he knew the fight was over. The clones who already landed on the surface got into their gunships and prepared to find the shield generator. These brave men knew it was a self-death mission. They likely would not make it back, and they were fine with that. Dooku's eyes scanned the skyline and watched the vessels rise up and start to speed towards the city. He pulled his hand to the edge of the chair and clasped it, before looking over his shoulder to look into the emotionless gaze of a super tactical droid, and he muttered to himself, words that not a soul would ever hear, nor care to hear. Simple words that uttered such a deathly sentiment. A life lived as another man's pawn. Nothing but irony it seems. Nothing but a wasted gift. He slumped over to the side and his blood ran cold. Outside of the palace, The clones made their landing under heavy turbo laser fire, and they called in the orbital bombardment. None of them survived the mission, but it would end the war and end the separatist movement for good. With the generator destroyed, Republic battleships could enter the atmosphere and threaten the unthinkable, something no officer would dare order on civilian targets. And like that, after the announcement of the Count's death, the Clone War would come to its end. Clones who were not killed in the initial battle marched into the city streets and raised Republic flags. It was over, Dooku was gone, and the separatist government was ready for its surrender. The clone government that had been running the Republic operations hosted a peace treaty on Kamino, where they finally reached an agreement with the representatives of the CIS and the Neutral Systems Coalition. The war was over. It was finally time to start fresh, and yet, at the end of the war, the entire meaning of it was lost. They fought for so long, and yet it felt like it was all for nothing. The ones who started it were dead. Those who commissioned the clone army were all gone, and the fundamental war to seize control over the galaxy and destroy the Jedi had failed. The Order was on Tashara when everything came to an end, and they didn't send a representative to Kamino to represent their order, because the effects of Order 66 hadn't worn off by this point. But when the Treaty of Kamino was signed, Order 150 was executed, and all the clones released their aggression. The reason the clones never got rid of the chips or the orders was because they saw it as a means to an end, something to help them get across the finish line. It did, and now they were free. The senators of Eridu were set free, and Anakin left Tashara to find his wife, and meet his children for the first time. Luke's name was still the same, however, Leia's was instead Kira. The twins were fine and well taken care of, but it was a pleasant surprise for Anakin. He said that he wanted to save her, but there was no reason to stress. Everyone was okay, and that's all that mattered at the end of the day. The former Galactic Republic considered being spiteful towards the clone army, but a clause in the treaty forbade it. The clause stated that inhuman treatment of the clones would result in tariffs and intergalactic trade blockades on the Republic or the other factions that had agreed to the treaty. Both Neutral Systems and Confederacy agreed to this, mostly because it wouldn't likely affect them. The main goal in the end was to unite the galactic powers, but still, the Republic was the least trustworthy. They hadn't been in power for over a year. The resolve had changed, but they agreed to work within the confines of a treaty that they didn't craft themselves. There would be apologies to the Jedi from the clones, and it would be forgiven, considering who the Jedi were. But the pain left on their order would be a generational one that would take years to fix. The heroes of the Clone Wars would get their peace as the galaxy evolved past a time of conflict. They were treated fairly and seen as heroes. While initially their movement wasn't favorable, especially after the hostile removal of the Jedi and takeover of the Senate, it was through their acts of valor and bravery that the clone army was able to bring peace to the galaxy, finally in an era truly free from the Sith. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granny Debane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cully Rooney, Chuck Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weaver 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, John Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Forward Sleazy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Me 3 First Names, Darksaint46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. Before supporting the channel, smash that like button, support me in other ways, check out the Penti Patrol Twitch for streams on Outlaws and maybe some other Star Wars games.
Yeah, sorry.
Hey, that's my gun, I want that! Oh, whoa, 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 chill guys, chill! Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So we had done What If Order 66 and What If Order 9 was activated at the same time. I kind of wanted to go a similar route to that, but not as deadly. The Order 66-99 one was like super chaotic. I wanted this one to be like a, Dooku's still trying to stick with the plan, but he doesn't really have an end goal in mind. By the time there is an actual end goal, he's starting to feel too sick. I think it was interesting to have Dooku kind of start dying from these natural effects of the dark side. He was already weak in Revenge of the Sith, so an extra year after that, I couldn't imagine he'd be doing great. But overall, I like the idea of having the clones kind of have their own militaristic government in charge of everything, as well as them kind of running the show and the war becoming an actual war. And with the discovery of the reserve forces being destroyed, I think the clones would probably actually win this war, especially without influence from the Republic itself. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all enjoyed the extra footage from Fall of the Republic, the Empire War mod. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.